Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Sheffield, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. Welcome to Crunch Time, a podcast mini-series by the Sheffield Wire evaluating how the two professional football clubs in the spiritual home of football have fared this season. We're going to be looking at how their run-ins are looking and a quick look to the future. My name's Jack Roberts, and joining me today is Luke Gill. Luke, how are you, mate?
Very good, mate. Nice to see you. Had a bit of on the football subject, bit of a tough weekend, but we're not here to talk about my club at all. We're here to talk about the two Sheffield clubs.
So the premise of Crunch Time is simple. We're going to be exploring the seasons of Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday. Two clubs who not only share a city, but have shared a similar plight this season. For the Blades, unfortunately, relegation from the Premier League seems like a foregone conclusion. Although it's not mathematically confirmed, they're 10 points from safety with 6 games to play. What's more, relegation to the Championship is going to be met with a points deduction for next season's campaign after defaulting on payments from last season's campaign.
For the Owls, it still seems like it's all to play for. Despite the worst start of the season in their history, since Rolls come in, they've had the ball rolling, as we like to say. Around the for Wednesday, they've been on a great run of form, although recently they've tailed off a little bit. Despite sitting in 23rd, they're only a point from safety with 3 games left to play. However, the run-in does look pretty difficult from here until the end. The pendulum could potentially swing in their favour depending on how these 3 fixtures go with 9 points to play for, but like their neighbours on the other side of Sheffield, they could be condemned to an immediate relegation back to the division that they were in last season.
We're also going to be speaking to Chris Holt, who is the sports editor at the Sheffield Star, and getting fans' opinions on their teams this season, because after all, football without fans is nothing, and that's all to come on Crunch Time. Despite the jubilant scenes which saw the 2022-23 season end with promotion back to the Premier League, it was clear Sheffield United would struggle to stay there on a shoestring budget. The gulf between the Premier League and the Championship is a jump many clubs struggle with, and unfortunately, the Blades have struggled and then some. At the time of recording, they're rooted to the foot of the Premier League. They've got just 3 wins all season, and so far have 16 points, which has the potential to be one of the lowest in history. And unfortunately for their backline, it's not great reading. A minus 54 goal difference after being on the end of multiple drubbings. And when I say multiple, I am not kidding. In the 2 games against Arsenal this season, the Blades shipped 11 goals. 5 at the Emirates in October and 6 at Bramall Lane in March. And as well, early in 2024, they played Brighton twice in 3 weeks, and they shipped 5 goals in each of those games, losing 5-2 in the FA Cup and then 5-0 in the league. The heaviest defeat, however, came right back in September when they lost 8-0 at home to Newcastle United. It wasn't necessarily the number of goals that they scored, it was the fact that each goal was scored by a different player. In a game that involves a team of 11 players, shipping 8 goals to 8 different players is a shocking look for Paul Heckingbottom, who was a manager at the time. But ultimately, he stayed in the job until December, until finally a 5-0 loss to relegation rivals Burnley cost him his job. Chris Wilder, who led the Blades back to the Premier League in 2019, was appointed to take over, and whilst there have been glimpses of improvement at the club, ultimately, Wilder's task was to climb Everest armed only with Crocs and Kendall mint cake. It was the impossible, and unfortunately, it's looking improbable. What's more, when relegation is confirmed, the Blades will start their Championship season next year on minus 2 points. This is after the news last week that the club, according to Louise Taylor of The Guardian, have reached a negotiated settlement with the English Football League after defaulting on payments owed to clubs for other players from their promotion-winning 2022-23 season. Because the defaults totalled more than 550 days, the league's rules state that a 2-point penalty was triggered. And according to Danny Hall of the Sheffield Star, these deals involved Ryan Brewster, Sander Berger and Anel Amadodzic. But it's worth noting that any unpaid fees that added up to 8 million have now been settled. The first question we wanted to ask Chris Holt was, where had it all gone wrong for the Blades?
Well, actually, it goes all the way back to last season, essentially. Whenever they did actually get promotion, it became very clear that there wasn't enough money in the bank to be making a challenge a concerted challenge and a financial backing that was going to be needed to make them competitive in the league, and that became very clear very quickly. And then, of course, there was a lot of doddering around over the summer over transfers, and they just got off to a really bad start that they never really recovered from. But I don't think they were ever really going to recover from anyway, because they just weren't set up to be a Premier League team this season. The players weren't good enough. Well, I'd say the players weren't good enough as a squad collectively. There wasn't enough depth, there wasn't enough quality, there wasn't enough Premier League experience in there, and that was essentially it. I mean, it just boils down to they just haven't been good enough.
So, Luke, I want to ask what went wrong for the Blades, but I'm pretty sure the answer's obvious. Everything.
Yeah, I mean, from I've caught a lot of them being a Liverpool fan. I've watched a lot of United this year in the Premier League, and I think, I know it's quite simple to say on air, but they just don't score any goals, and they also concede too many goals, despite, on paper having some good lads at the back there. We mentioned Amadou Tishu was involved with the FSR breaches, but just looking at him just as a profile of a player, he's a top quality player. He was one of the best players in the Championship for United last season. However, going on to the side of them being leaky, you look at Fotheringham in goal, who was obviously replaced by Gerbic in January. I just remember thinking, he just doesn't save anything. I know that's quite a simple way of referring to a goalkeeper, but he was in net for a lot of these drubbings you're talking about there, and I feel like that's one of the biggest things. And although, at the other end of the pitch, Ollie McBurney's a little bit of a cult hero, again, I just don't think he gets on the score sheet enough. Myself, obviously, we look at January, they brought in Ben Brereton Diaz, and he seems to have hit the ground running. I believe he's probably scored 4 in his first 7 games, I believe it was, but I think he's dried up a little bit now, and he's obviously picked up a little bit of an injury as well. But yeah, like you say, mate, I know it's quite easy to say everything's went wrong, but yeah, I think in simplistic terms, the two ends of the pitch, they're just not good enough from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Brereton Diaz there. They signed him on loan from Villarreal in January, and he's sort of given Blades fans a bit of joy in what's otherwise been a pretty miserable season.
Yeah, few and far between, yeah.
His stats for the season are 9 games, 4 goals, which, to say that it came in January, I'd say is pretty respectable.
Yeah, I agree.
But obviously, with it being a club in dire need of goals, it's not the best returns. But again, I think for a loan signing, you can't really do much more.
Yeah.
And a couple of seasons ago, Villarreal signed Brereton Diaz from Blackburn, so he was a Championship player for many years, and he actually did quite well in the Championship. And I imagine Blades fans will want him to stay beyond the loan window. The question is, will he?
The most difficult thing I would say probably is you mentioned obviously he played a couple of years ago in the Championship for a while for Blackburn for a good few years, but I'd imagine the contract that he's probably signed when he's went to Villarreal has been pretty lucrative, and with the Blades going down, already having these sort of financial things hanging over their head, I would be surprised if they could entice Brereton Diaz to do a year in the second division, to be honest. But I mean, you'd think that he would be able to fire them back up there, or at least get, with that record you were talking about, he can't do much more as a lone player. This is the Premier League. If he's dropping down a level, you'd think that he'd be even more prolific. But again, I think those financial sort of hindrances might make that a difficult deal to get across, to be honest, mate.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was looking into the contract that Brereton Diaz signed with Villarreal, they signed him on a free transfer last summer on a 4-year deal, and although he's not really featured much for Villarreal and is yet to get off the mark, I imagine the fact that he sort of went from the Championship to, the Spanish First Division, that is progress for a player's career. Why on earth would he want to backtrack by just reversing that, essentially? Yeah,
I know. I've kept a little bit of an eye on Villarreal. I usually do anyway, because I'm a big Spanish football fan, as Roberts knows. But that's a discussion for another day. But they were actually very much underwhelmed. The side from Castellón, a lot of their fans were a little bit disappointed that they actually brought him in, despite the promise. I know been playing for Chile, hasn't he? His grandparents' nation. He's been playing well for the Chilean national team as well. I know obviously he was dropped recently because he couldn't speak the language, but he was reinstated back into the side. But yeah, I think he was a little bit underwhelming perhaps. So yeah, as you say, it might be a step back in his career, but then at the same time, if he does take that step back and he manages to fire United back up next season, which I'm sure we're going to discuss in a moment, the sort of practicality and logistics of being able to do that, then maybe he's going to take a step back to then take another step forward again. But yeah, I think it's the lucrative nature of the contract. 4-year deal. United's going to have to pay a lot of money to get him out of that contract, I think. And again, going back to the financial situation, I do think that's going to be a real hamstring for them.
Although it felt like the points deduction came from nowhere, we wanted to ask Chris just how it would impact the Blades next season.
I don't think it'll be too much. There'll be too much of an impact, really. I mean, I say that now. If they end up missing out on the playoffs or automatic by 2 points, then obviously it has had an impact. It all goes back to last year again, when they had a transfer embargo in January, because they had defaulted on payments for monies owed to various teams for players that they had bought over the course of a few years. It seems like the owners have taken a bit of a gamble on essentially what they could have done was sold Sanderberg or Iliman Njai last January to balance the books. They've taken a gamble, kept them, hoping that they will get them up, and then they'll deal with the consequences further down the line. And that's where we are now. The consequences are they had the embargo last year, which meant actually what Paul Heckingbottom did in getting the team promoted was an incredible achievement. But now they've got a couple of points deducted for defaulted on those payments. Like I say, I don't think it'll be a major issue. It's a setback, but the championship's just a huge, long marathon of an epic season, and a couple of points probably isn't going to make a great deal of difference. If it had a bit more than that, I think that's different. If you were talking 5 or 6, then different kettle of fish altogether.
Looking towards next season, obviously the first thing that I'd want to ask is where do they go from here? But I suppose the answer's obvious. The only way is up.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got to expect to be coming straight back up. They brought players in at the start of the season. I know Gustavo Hamer's been one of the probably standout performers for United this year. They brought him from Coventry, who of course was from the Championship, and he was very impressive there last season. So with that quality of player, I think Hamer, just going on to him, Gustavo Hamer, I think he's good enough to be a Premier League player. But again, with the long contract that he signed, with the money signed last summer, I believe that he'll probably stay there if they do go down, maybe at least for one season. But yeah, with that quality, and you said last time they were there getting over 90 points, you've got to expect them to be right up there, haven't you, next season, regardless of the points deduction that they will be giving out when play gets going again in August. But what do you think of the chances, mate? Do you think they'll come back up?
Well, this is what I was going to sort of talk about next. The gulf in quality, as I already mentioned, between the Premier League and Championship is insane. Even though there is a lot of money in sort of going up to the Premier League, and then obviously you get your parachute payments coming back down, there's no guarantee that you'll invest that right. And you look at the likes of Sunderland, who went back-to-back relegations. You've got Birmingham, who dropped out in the early 2010s and have never got back. The likes of Huddersfield and Stoke, who got relegated, and they're currently in a relegation battle in the Championship. There's no guarantee that they're going to come straight back up to the Premier League. And I know with obviously the starting 2 points down, I know you can turn that round quite easily with just one win. But considering everyone else is starting on 0, it's never nice to be disadvantaged from the start. So it's like, how do they push for that, straight back up despite this?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. I suppose only time will tell, but I think the key thing is for them, as much as they can do, is try and keep hold of those players who are Premier League quality or, higher Championship quality, the likes of Ahmedhodzic, Brenton Diaz possibly could be made a permanent transfer. McBurney's a lot more prolific in the second division. I think it is the key thing. Hamer, who we mentioned, is just keeping hold of them players and trying to build from there. I don't know if Wilder's going to be given the job or if he's going to move on. I think at the end of the season, I'm not sure. But Wilder's got experience down the Championship. I think the key thing, just from a neutral point of view, would be keeping a lot of the quality of that squad in in South Yorkshire, still at Bramall Lane, and just seeing where they can go from next season. As we just said, over 90 points last time they were down there. There's no reason why they can't go and do that again, I don't think.
Yeah. We finished our chat with Chris by asking him what needs to change for the Blades to get back to the Premier League. And although his answer was surprising, it was pragmatic.
I don't think they should be hung up on getting promotion straight away. Unfortunately, I think financially they probably. So I'm not sure if they have to, but they can certainly do with it. But I think there just needs to be a bit of a reset at the club in terms of there's a lot of really young players coming through, really young talented players coming through, who, all being well, should be the basis of Sheffield United's first team for the next 5 or 6 years. That is if they haven't already been sold by them with a fairly hefty profit. It wouldn't be a disaster, is basically all I'm saying, if they didn't go up next year. I think there need to be a reset, sort out the team. There are around about 15 players out of contract in the summer. That needs to be sorted out. The majority of them will not be coming back. So there's a huge upheaval happening, or about to happen in the summer. And if you're trying to bet in and give more game time to young players and potentially bring in something like 8, 9, maybe even more new players into the squad, that's a really difficult thing to do. So I think there needs to be a bit of patience from everybody to kind of understand what is going to happen in the summer and just how difficult it would be to go straight back up. That said, I don't think the Championship, as things stand, is likely to be as strong next year as maybe the past few seasons. So they could well find it. I mean, they should be in their chat. They should be aiming for top 6 regardless. All I'm saying is if they don't end up going up, it shouldn't be seen as a disaster, so long as there has been kind of a step forward taken in terms of blooding those youngsters, giving them more experience and bedding in what is essentially a brand new squad.
I've been out speaking to some Sheffield United fans about the season, and I got some of their views. One fan said that he's got nothing to say that's fit for broadcast, which I think is actually quite fitting to broadcast, because it just sort of shows that, you know, these fans can't really say anything without getting too worked up. And obviously, while it's good that, you know, football induces those emotions, obviously when it's going bad, it's going awful in football. That's from my own personal experience. I don't know about yours, but it seems to be when it's going good, it's going great, and then when it's bad, it's awful.
When it rains, it pours.
Exactly. Someone else said next season should be about building around the youth and binning the useless players. Someone else said boardroom chaos undermined Heckingbottom and we never had a chance. The vast majority of the football we've played has been abject. And then I'll probably finish with the starkest quote: a disgraceful and pathetic circus that has humiliated us as a club and fan base.
Dear me, that's really damning, isn't it?
It is, and as we say, although at the time of recording relegation is not mathematically confirmed, it is a foregone conclusion. Thanks for listening to this episode of Crunch Time. To listen to Luke and Chris give their thoughts on the other side of the Steel City, check out our other episode entitled All to Play For. We'll see you there.